And I see something way to your
Is that
right
better?
up on the wall.
All right. Good afternoon, Dr. Patterson. It's good to see you again.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Fantastic. So we're continuing some of our discussions that are associated with cancer, but today we're on a little bit different topic in the way that I like to talk about quality of life. And specifically, I feel like you have a lot to say about one of the many ways that you've increased and enjoyed your quality of life, which has to do with the coincidences or connections in your life. And many of those, of course, came around travel. So maybe you could start off by explaining how you got the bug to travel. What age were you?
Okay. All right. How much time do you have? I'm not kidding you. Yeah, going back when I was 12, 13 years old, back in the late 1930s, I came across a book I'd never seen before by Richard Halliburton. Richard Halliburton. He wrote a bunch of books, but the first one was The Royal Road to Romance. I started reading the book, and I saw things in that book I never heard about before. For example, the Taj Mahal. I never heard about it. Didn't know where it was. I asked my mother. She's, well, it's in India somewhere. Little did I know that book started me on the road to romance for travel and education I never thought possible. Now, as he said in his book, that you can have a high school diploma, you can have a college degree, but then your real education starts after that with what we call your postgraduate lifelong journey of education and information. That changed my life forever, right there. Unbelievable.
That is
And
unbelievable. What age were you when you learned about Richard Halliburton?
I'm sorry?
At what age was that?
Well, I was probably 13 or 14. And then what happened, the principal of the high school brought him in to talk to the Knoxville High School auditorium for several hundred students, big high school. And he just mesmerized all of us with his stories over and over again. After the program, I went up there and I said, Mr. Halliburton, I want to tell you how much your book meant to me and stimulated a desire to learn and travel and become part of what you call the postgraduate education for the rest of your life. Beyond high school, beyond college, but the rest of it is up to each individual to look and learn and learn. And in the process, Cindy, what I found out, it makes the world so much more interesting if you know a lot about it. And then it's a reciprocal thing. When you learn that much, then you become more interesting to the world to know who you are. So it goes back and forth, reciprocal. That was the biggest learning experience I'd had.
So that's amazing to me. And if I remember correctly, I believe you mentioned that you actually mapped out for yourself where you planned to travel when you were able to, when you got older, right? You had it mapped out in the bedroom? Or?
Well, what happened in the middle of World War II, I was in pre-med. And instead of 4 years of med school, we had 15 months. In 15 months, I was in medical school in Memphis, and I didn't feel I'd be able to hack it, but still, I didn't want to give up my travel urge. So I worked in a clinic, earned $900, went down to the Memphis publishing place for the schools. I said, I want your most expensive maps. And she said, well, for what school? I said, the medical school. We've never had anybody at the medical school ask for that. I'm asking for it. I have $900. I want your best maps. I bought them, and the rest of the time in Memphis, I would rotate the maps on the four walls of my dorm. And my friends would come in and said, my God, Reese, the world is a big place out there. I said, yep, and I'm going to be a big part of it. And that was the beginning of my travel. I memorized everything on these maps. And it paid off.
Some of the amazing stories that I've heard from you in mentoring patients had to do with the coincidences that occurred over time. And I thought maybe today you could share your trip to India, what you were doing there in medicine, first of all. I think that's fascinating. And then a little bit of the, you could call it a mishap, an almost mishap that occurred for you getting out of India. How about that?
Well, well, the thing is, in World War, Korean War, I was sent to Clark Air Force Base, 60 miles north of Manila in the Philippines. And when I went on leave, I would travel all over Asia, all over, and wrote monographs. And of course, I went from China to India. And then years later, in 1956, the last half of 1956, I went to the East Punjab. East Punjab is on the northwest side of India. West Punjab is in Pakistan. And if you recall, in 1948, Mahatma Gandhi was able to bring the Hindus and the Muslims together as a cohesive group. But then he was assassinated in Delhi in 1948. And suddenly the whole thing blew up. And the Muslims and the Hindus no longer could get along. And that was in 1948. And so some years later, in 1956, I went over there and volunteered services to bring in modern cataract surgery techniques and equipment to the Ramlal Eye Hospital there in Amritsar in the East Punjab, northwest part of India. Amazing what I learned there. And then my culture and their culture were so different, so very different. And I began to realize, my goodness, this is part of what Halliburton said. You're going to learn a lot about the world. And I did. I found out then, after 6 months there, I went to Kashmir. And Kashmir is a place north of India, but it's primarily Muslim. And the Hindu India took it over because of the mineral rights and the natural resources they want. And there's still a big bone of contention between Pakistan, which is on the west side of India, and then India controls the Kashmir. I went to Srinagar, the capital. It's just amazing when I got up there. Went on a picnic on horseback up at a place called Nagapoprik. And we sat down, the guide and I, and suddenly the wonderful lunch we had there. And suddenly a big shadow came down over us. And this enormous condor or big eagle came in, snatched everything on the table, the chicken and so forth, and flew off with it. And he said, Reese, sometimes this happens. They've got eagle eyes. They can see what's down there before you, and boom, your lunch is gone. So you have to be careful and keep looking upward like I am right now at the top of your head. But I found that another culture there that I just was fascinated with. Then at the end of the 6 months, I had to travel then from Amritsar, which is the capital there of East Punjab, down to Delhi, and then to Calcutta. At Calcutta, if you recall, in September of 1956, the British, the French, and the Israelis took over the Suez Canal from Egypt. When that happened, all east-west travel from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Pacific Rim, where Calcutta is, and I had reservations the next morning on Pan Am. If I couldn't get on that, then I was going to be stuck in Calcutta for months because there's no travel time you could go back and forth anymore. So if you had a reservation and couldn't meet it, then I would be last in line for weeks or months over there. So I said to him, look, first, he said, you have to pay income tax for the money that you earn doing cataract surgery there in the Ramlal Eye Hospital. I said, well, I donated my time and I brought equipment there for them to use with modern cataract surgery. And he said, well, you got to pay tax on something. I will pick up the phone, I'll pay for it, call Amritsar, they'll tell you I donated my services. Sir, this is India. It'll take several weeks to get through. This is not America. I said, oh my God. I said, there's got to be some way of getting over this. Well, he said, there's a commissioner, Raghbir Singh, on the other side of Calcutta. I would suggest that you go over there and make a plea to him. But he said, frankly, no one in India works for nothing. That's why we don't believe you. So I went on the other side of Calcutta, went up there, see Commissioner Raghbir Singh, and sat up there out to lunch. Well, somebody walked by the office, and I said, will Commissioner Singh be back? Well, he's on lunch. I want to be about 30 minutes. We have a 3 or 4 hour lunch. I said, you got to be kidding. He said, sir, this is not America. He says, just sit down and wait. Well, I sat down on a big bench there on the 3rd floor, and I looked, and suddenly I fell asleep. Then I woke up. I heard this go ping, 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 ping. I said, my God, that's a badminton shuttlecock. I went up to the window, looked out, and there are all these civil servants out there on the most beautiful badminton courts, about 20 of them, and they're playing for money. Well, my background, at the age of 13 or 14, I won the badminton championship, singles and doubles here in Knoxville, several years in a row as a young teenager. So that was my interest. So I'd say, well, Commissioner Raghbir Singh is down there somewhere. I'll just go down and watch him. So I went down there, sat on the bench, and a lot of spectators around. And then suddenly one player said to his partner, I've got a meeting I've got to go to. And they were playing from round robin for big sums of money. Down at any rate, he said, you got to stay here. Look at the money we won here. He said, I'm sorry, but you've got to get another partner. The man sat there and looked at me. He said, who are you? I said, well, I'm here to make some money. Well, do you play badminton? I said, well, I played it. Are you any good? I said, depends on to whom you speak. Well, I'm desperate, he says. Come on, be my partner. So we played for another hour, hour and a half, and we defeated every single other team. He walked off and said he had a big pot full of the rupees. And he said, my God, I've made a fortune here. He said, I feel like I should give some of it to you. I said, no, that's okay. I'm here for other reasons. He said, okay, I'll keep it all then. So why are you here? I said, I'm supposed to meet a commissioner from the airport on the other side of Calcutta. Well, what's the commissioner's name? I said, it's Commissioner Raghbir Singh. Sandy, he said, that's me. I couldn't believe. He says, come upstairs, we need to talk. I told him the whole story. And he says, Reese, it is true that no one in India works for nothing. But he said, your story is so crazy. It's got to be true. He says, I'm tempted to go ahead and sign your release, but if you're lying to me, it might cost me my job. I said, Commissioner, why would I sit up here and lie to you about something this important? He says, I'm inclined to believe you. So he signed it, went on next back to the airport. And the next morning, I sat there waiting for the plane to take off for Bangkok in Thailand. And then I realized I owe this guy something. So I sat down and I wrote a letter of thanks to the editor of the New Delhi Times. Now, Sydney, at that time, today India's 1.3 billion, China's 1.4 billion. But back then, India was about 5 or 6. It was the longest circulation paper in India. So I mailed it to the letters of the New Delhi Times, just thanking them and thanking India and thanking Commissioner Raghbir Singh for solving my plight there, being stuck in Calcutta maybe for months. And I mailed it to him. 2 months later in Philadelphia, when I was taking my boards for ophthalmology, I had a letter from him. I said, Dear Reese, thank God you were telling the truth. The New Delhi Times got the letter, and it's the biggest letter in the New York Times on that edition. And now I'm the most famous person all over India. And this has immeasurably enhanced my career. I've never forgot. But how do these things happen? How so unlikely? I kept coming back to Halliburton. He says, remember, if you want a calm life, no ups and downs, stay in your backyard. And you'll have a very predictable, no ups and downs. But then if you want to get the rest of your education, get out of your backyard, see the world, and travel. You'll have a lot of ups, a lot of downs. And that's exactly what that was. There's an up. We won all that money for him. And I bet in the process, I had to potentially be stuck in Calcutta for months. And that solved it for me.
So it's just amazing, right? Because just having known the badminton, being such a good player, being at that place at that time, having to be asked to play badminton by the very commissioner. I mean, the whole thing is a setup. It's just amazing. Just amazing how these things occur. Didn't you mention that when you were doing the cataract surgery, there were so many patients, like they walk there for tens of hundreds of miles? I forget what you said. They had to walk there, and you did the cataracts under the trees even?
You talking about, you mean what? How many we did?
Yeah.
We did 50 to 100 in the afternoon, assembly line there at Amazar. But I was, at the time, doing the usual sewing up the eyeball after taking the cataract out. They said, Dr. Patterson, you're sewing up the assembly line. Don't sew it up. I said, but we were running out of bed. We had to put them out under the trees in all directions. And many of them had upper respiratory tuberculosis. They coughed a lot. And the sad thing about it, if you cough after cataract surgery with no stitches holding, then the eye is destroyed during the night. And I said, oh my God. But another thing I found was they didn't understand American humor. And we'd make rounds every morning. And one of the Sikhs there was always late. And when he came in late, making round, I would say, good afternoon, sir. And he said, Dr. Patterson, it is yet still morning. I said, yes, but you're so late. Oh, he said, you make American joke. Ha, ha, ha. I said, yep, ha, ha, ha. Well, a week later, I was late coming in. He ran all the way down the hall in the hospital and said, good afternoon, Dr. Patterson. I make an American joke, right? Ha, ha, ha. I said, you got me. But they didn't understand American humor. And I got in a lot of trouble with my kidding the doctors. They were so serious. But then it went on to, after that, actually, it was Bangkok, Thailand. And I wanted to go over and see the ruins of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. The people don't, an average person, Cindy, they don't know, they never heard of Angkor Wat. Right. But it was the greatest civilization in the Far East from the 8th to the 12th century. And I finally got over there and saw it. But I'd planned to do it some years earlier when I was at Clark Air Force Base, but we couldn't get over there at that time. I still have records of all of this and the attempts to get to Angkor Wat. I finally got there, but it was a magnificent thing. The other thing is, my introduction to India was the Taj Mahal with Richard Halliburton. I didn't realize that in the next few decades, I would visit the Taj Mahal 3 times. There, it was like going to Mecca. It's something, a ceremony, because that's my introduction to Halliburton and travel. And he was right. And I've never stopped traveling since then.
That's amazing. So there's one thing that came over the ocean to you, a coincidence that I heard about in the past, and that had to do not with badminton, but with tennis. And another person who had the same diagnosis, stomach cancer, as you, and the association of who he knew. I'm talking about Norman and Minda. That story is magical. It's hard to believe. I mean, that's a long one, I know, but maybe
it is another one of those things. At Clark Air Force Base in the Korean War, I was there from 1951 to 53, and I met a beautiful, charismatic Filipino girl. Name was Minda Feliciano. And she was just charismatic and a great dancer and so forth. She taught me a lot of the Latin steps there. And so she had a scholarship at the University of Melbourne in Australia. And so I told her, we'll keep in touch, phone and letters. And she went to there. And then she had a meteoric rise. She became one of the most famous people in the Far East. And the Australian government used her to broadcast several times a week, having people come, go to school here, visit Australia, and so forth. She got into entertainment in Manila, and then in Hollywood, and then in London. And it's incredible. She knew all the greats in Hollywood. And then in the 1980s, she met the English actor Michael Caine, and they lived together for years. And then they broke up, and she married someone, the most eligible bachelor in England. His name was Norman Lonsdale. Can I go on with this?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. And so they were married in the, I guess, early 1990, 94. And then a friend of mine went over there and was playing in a tournament in Southeast England, a big international grass court tournament at Frenton. And he was sitting at the table with his host, a wealthy London aristocrat who had places all over the world, had 100-foot yachts south of France. And he found out that his host had advanced cancer and had been an excellent tennis player. And so, and say, well, you know, are you playing any more tennis? He said, no, I've been given 1 year to live. And he said, sir, I've got a friend in Knoxville that been through the same thing, and he's back winning national tournaments. Well, suddenly the host's wife was sitting one table over to the left. She jumps up, goes over there, and said to my friend from Nashville, who's your friend in Knoxville that seemingly recovered from stomach cancer? He said, Reese Patterson. She said, oh my God, I thought he was dead. Yeah. That was Minda, 50 years later. She called me, she still had my number. Said, we need to come over. We'd like to bring our servants with us. And he said, you have a tea house down there? I said, yes, we'll come in. They came in 2 weeks later, and the rest is history. Mm-hmm. For the next 10 years, Norman and I played tennis in tournaments, Western Europe, and on the grass court in Frenton. And then then he had box seats at Wimbledon with 2 weeks in Wimbledon. After that, we'd then fly down to Malta or the south of France, wherever his 100-foot yacht was. And then we'd play all over the Mediterranean, North Africa, Malta, Italy, Eastern, Greece, and then Dubrovnik, all the way up the Croatian coast and the Adriatic. Even went down into Italy up there, played Parma, P-A-R-M-A. I said, like a typical American, I said to one of the guys at the tournament there in Parma, I said, yo, this is a beautiful place. What are you famous for? He said, my God, sir, you're a typical American. Where do you think Parmesan cheese comes from? I said, it never occurred to me. But that was a big cheese, son. And he couldn't believe I didn't know that.
Wow.
I learned.
Right.
Halliburton was right.
He was right. And what's amazing, I think a lot of people hearing that story would already think it was quite a coincidence that your friend in Nashville is playing tennis in England and meets someone with the stomach cancer. I mean, that's not a common diagnosis. But the unbelievable coincidence is that that was Minda's husband who knew you after 50 years. It's incredible that
almost 50 years. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so hard to believe.
Well, it's just amazing because he and I, my friend from Nashville, played all over Western Europe and in England before I met Norman. But he was a good player. But suddenly, when Norman came in the picture, Norman and I then went all over the area there. And he had a love for tennis. I keep saying one of my monographs that Norman and I had three things in common. We both were in love with the same woman. We both had advanced stomach cancer, and we both had a passion for tennis. And then when we got into the next 10 years on that 100-foot yacht, it became at times a little bit awkward. Uh, but, and I said to Norman, I said, this is an incredible coincidence. Yeah, it certainly is. But just again, I thank Richard Halliburton, the Royal Road to Romance. And he was right. The education that I got from all these travels, all over, east to west, all across China, down into a little place in the Hindu Kush, western part of the Himalayan mountains called Hunza, Hunza. Anybody that's hear of this, I want you to look up the story of Hunza, Hunza. Alexander the Great made it famous in 300 BC when he and the Greek army came down through there, conquering all of the Middle East, and they was on his way to India. Mm-hmm. But his soldiers said, Alexander, you've got a middle-aged army now. This is paradise down here, this beautiful valley and the rice terraces going up. They want to settle down, and they did for a year or two. His soldiers married the women, had families. Then Alexander says, "It's time to go. We got to go and defeat the great empires in Western India." And they said, "Well, can we come back here?" He said, "Yes. We'll have one more conquest. We'll come back here. Those of you who want to go back to Greece, that's fine too." And so when I was there, Cindy, I saw light-skinned, blue-eyed people, and these were the descendants of Alexander the Great's army, and they talked about Alexander the Great as being only maybe 100 years ago, not 300 BC, and I couldn't get over that, and I just reveled in this, and I've written all this up in the history of governments, which I think you've seen that. Uh-huh. But this again, Richard Halliburton, travel. It's the education that we all would benefit from. And that one statement, it makes the world more interesting to you. And the process, the world then becomes more interested in you as a person. Mm. So it's a reciprocal arrangement there. I wouldn't take anything in the world for it. What happened?
Amazing how much it enriched your life. And I wonder, because when I listen to you, you're able to link even things now immediately back to history, a geographic place and a historical time. That link must give you such great perspective all the time on anything that's happening. Recently, I think I saw something in the news about the Uyghurs. And I asked you about that. I was seeing this information about the Uyghurs, they're being suppressed or oppressed rather, and brainwashed, I guess, in China. And you had so much to say about the
Can I tell you about?
Yeah.
Can I tell you about the Uyghurs?
I'd love
to. I was there for at least a week. And these were the Muslim minorities in northwest China that the Chinese are trying to eliminate any religion, any kind of religion. And so they persecuted the Uyghurs. And I went up in there and I said, my God, the capital is called Urumqi. I could spell it for you, Urumqi. And it's an oasis town. Well, I thought an oasis town would be small, maybe a few thousand people. No, Cindy, it had 2 million people. And they went to the hospital there. In the hospital, went up and down the corridors, and there were not enough beds, and the patients were lined up on each side of the corridors, and most of them had jaundice, infectious hepatitis, all over. And every clinic I went in that area would have, in both Chinese and in English, diarrhea clinic in English and in Chinese below it. It just was, we don't realize the health hazards in that part of the world, the third world nations. And of course, they need help. But this just was part of my education as I went through there. And finally, I went to one of the little places we stayed in a hotel there. And in there, I went down the line because by this time, my diet has to be a mixture of protein and carbohydrate. But I've got to have protein. So I went down the line there. And the only thing that I could put to eat was they had some rice, and they had some nuts, and a few other things there that were really not very appetizing, but I could spot the ones with I have to have protein with living without a stomach. And so the little gal behind the counter there, every time I'd pick out something down there, she would go, ish, ish, ish. And I asked the interpreter next to me, why is she saying ish, ish, ish? He says, don't you realize what you put together is horrible to her? It's a mess. And she said, how is he going to eat this? And ish, ish, ish is not fit for eating that way. I mixed too many things together, but I was able to pick out protein and carbohydrate in the right mixture. Mm-hmm. But even they said this ish, 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 horrible looking, most unappetizing. But see, just another culture. But you learn to cope.
That's beautiful. So next time we're going to talk a little bit more about nutrition, because we're going to talk about your journey with exercise, and that of course required special nutrition. But we've got to wrap today up. We only have a couple more minutes here. So thank you so much for sharing the information about the travel, and really it's the coincidences that are the synergy in your life is amazing. You probably have at least a dozen more examples of synergy like that. It's just those connections, right?
It's hard to believe that it all happened, mm-hmm. especially Menda 50 years later, and Norman and I. And it's just, when I think about what I've learned by travel and the people all over the world, and then get to Urumqi and the Uyghurs, and then down into Hunza. I got pictures of Hunza. I kept showing them to you. It's the most beautiful little valley, and no wonder Alexander the Great's army, 300 BC, didn't want to leave, and they sat down and they married and had children. And then he said, we got to go to India. We got one more conquest. And so they had to go. But then on the way back, Alexander the Great died of malaria there in that part of the world.
Okay. Wow. All right. So
one other fine little thing.
Okay.
You got time for one quick one?
Maybe.
Okay.
Let's try.
It's about Hiliburton. Hiliburton, and he wanted one last trip. He hired somebody to go with him to sail a Chinese junk from Hong Kong to San Francisco in 1939. And that was right after I said goodbye to him at Knoxville High School. He disappeared, and obviously they drowned. The Chinese junk could not cross the Pacific Ocean, but that's what they tried to do. And that was the end of Richard Haliburton.
Wow. 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 Very enriched life, what he gave you by inspiring you.
Oh, it's
wonderful. And you've inspired
wonderful.
So many other people
Wonderful.
to travel, and this will hopefully inspire people as well. So, all right. So you'll come back again then?
I'd like to come back and share more stories.
All right, great. Thank you again for this time. I'll see you again soon.
Now you understand why they call me Motor Mouth.
That's good. We love it.